Alright, so I'll swing with Jesmon, and then I'll Digivolve into Omni, and swing for game. Alright, bro. GG's. Oh, okay. Oh, whatever. Man, this Jesmon deck is wild, dude. This is definitely, if not the best deck in the meta, it's probably gonna be top 3 right next to Gabubond and Agubond.
I did it.
What the crap was that?
I did it. I did it. I finally put it together. It's so strong, it's so powerful. It defeats everything. It defeats Modern Friendship, Modern Bravery, Jesmon even. What are they gonna do? They can't do anything. They can't do nothing because it's too strong. It's too good. It's way too good. I finally did it. I'm so powerful. I'm so strong. I'm gonna defeat everyone.
What the crap are you doing in my bathroom?
I did it, Ray. I did it.
Did what?
I made a black deck that could defeat everything. It defies the
That doesn't answer why you're in my bathroom.
Don't worry about it. Just know that I have to tell the people. I have to tell them now. I am so sorry. I lost control there. And reasonably so, because I was so excited. But hey guys, welcome back to the stack. My name is Anthony. In the back we have, as always,
Help me.
he's fine. So this is our first BT6 deck profile, and we got some BT6 cards early. We're in the US. We had to ship it in from out of the country, and I've been playing a lot, doing a lot of play testing online on Discord. And basically, I made this deck because, as you guys know, almost all of my decks are black, and I wasn't satisfied with Black Royal Knights, and so I made this deck. I'm really excited about it. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to breeze through what all of the cards are, what they do, and then we're going to talk about the game plan. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. So let's start off with our level 2s here. We have 4 copies of Kupurimon. I only run 4 because I like consistency. On your turn, if the Digimon has blocker, it gets 1000 DP. Pretty straightforward, and that's pretty much it. We're going to go ahead and move on to our next one. We got just the 1 copy of Chumon here. Get them straightened out there. So all turns, your opponent cannot gain memory except from tamer effects. So, Hammer Spark and the like, effects from inheritables, things like that. Chumon tends to get removed pretty easily, so I just do the 1. I don't try too hard to slow down my opponent in that regard. But it helps sometimes. So we do the 1 copy of Chumon. Then we do 2 copies of Gatsumon, which is abnormal from most deck profiles. Which is abnormal from most deck profiles where I run Gatsumon because I usually do 4. I'm doing 2 here because I wanted to make space for a lot of my other rookies that I'm running here. But yeah, a little blocker that you can just toss down, 2 memory to attack, 3000 DP. Blocks most other level 3s, and yeah, that's why I got Gatsumon. Move on to the next one here. So we have 3 copies of Chikurimon. And so Chikurimon's pretty cool. Mostly play for the security effect. When it comes out of security, you trigger D-Digivolve 1 on one of your opponent's Digimon. And that's pretty much it. You want to have a couple safeguards in security. Mind you, a safeguard that can't be stopped by Delicate Plan or Wargreymon. So that's pretty cool. And we run the 3 copies. I would do a full 4, but I want to make space for a lot of the other things that I have here. So we just have 3 Chikurimon. Then we have 2 copies of Toy Agumon from the starter deck. So this one, at the end of your opponent's turn, if they did not attack at all, you get to trigger the draw 1, which is pretty cool. It just gets a little bit more draw in this deck. We don't want to rely on him too much for our draw. It's more of like a happy thing where if you get it and you're able to get off the effect, then it's pretty nice. Other than that, yeah, it's just the 2 copies of him. Pretty straightforward. And then lastly, last rookie here is going to be Toy Agumon from BT6, the newest one that just came out. So on all turns, if the Digimon has blocker, it gets 1000 DP. Which is more crucial than you think, and I'm going to talk about it more when we're going over this deck's game plan. But it's super powerful. This is the only rookie we do a 4 of because this is the one that we want to see the most. And that makes a total of 12 rookies in this deck, which is, again, abnormal from what I normally do. I normally have minimum 13. But there are a couple of other tech cards that we're going to go over that justify why I have the 12. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into our level 4s here. We have 4 copies of Numamon. And so Numamon is pretty cool. 1 cost to Digivolve, helps with that tempo efficiency. You're getting choked out. You're still able to get a decent amount done in your turn. And that 3 cost to play comes in handy a lot when you're bricking, you don't have a rookie, and you just really need to go up. Just being able to put him down is really nice. And so, yeah, we do the 4 copies of Numamon there. Oddly enough, this is weird, but this is what I'm doing. I have 1 copy of Tankmon. That's just for more tempo efficiency, and that's pretty much it. Just to have another level 4 that's a 1 cost to Digivolve that I could go up in. The 6000 DP comes up very rarely, but yeah, that's why we got the Tankmon. Then we have 2 copies of Dark Tyrannomon here. So Dark Tyrannomon's pretty cool. He's a 1 cost to Digivolve blocker. We made a rant video on cards that are a little overrated, and 1 cost blockers were one of them. But this one is justified. Again, we're going to talk about why it's justified later. And we're only running 2 of this one to make space for the next blocker, which I'm about to show you right now. So we'll go ahead and pull back Dark Tyrannomon. And we wanted to make space for 2 copies of Shademon. And basically, obviously, it's for his security effect. If it was just because he was a blocker, I'd probably do something like Sealstromon or maybe another Dark Tyrannomon. But we're doing the Shademon just to have like those last minute saves that come in handy. Something that comes out of security. You get a blocker, something you can Digivolve on top of. That's pretty handy. We do him over Nanimon because I don't really feel like Nanimon is just something you could Digivolve over. There's not really much else that, I mean, I guess you could swing with Nanimon, but I don't really see myself doing that a whole lot. So I prefer Shademon over Nanimon. And then lastly, we got the 1 copy of Mechanorimon. Super helpful when it comes up. Stops rookies, stops a lot of level 4s. We do just the 1 because that 3 cost is pretty chunky to go into, and we don't always want to pay that. But yeah, he's a super good tech card. Really stops out a lot of your opponent's plays, or slows down your opponent immensely once he's on the board. So yeah, I love Mechanorimon. All right. Now, let's go ahead and move on to our level 5s. So we have 4 copies of Gigadramon here. Now, before you get excited, right? Because you might see Gigadramon, you'll be like, oh, it's a black-red shenanigans going on here. It's just for the Inheritable. The Inheritable is a big part of what makes this deck works. So plus 2000 DP on your opponent's turn. So you can kind of see that we're going for a big blockers kind of deal with this deck. And yeah, that's pretty much it. The Inheritable, nothing else. It's cool that he's treated as red. Just like a side note, in my experience, it's just a little bit unsafe in a lot of matchups where you want to keep your guy in raising. But if you have a red level 6, then you have to promote him in order for him to be considered a red Digimon. So we'll talk about that in another video. But yeah, Gigadramon for that plus 2000 DP on your opponent's turn. And then the GOAT of all black level 5s is Gogmamon. Gogmamon plus 1000 DP on all turns. You got that Digiburst 1 as main, and you get plus 2000 DP to any Digimon until the end of your opponent's next turn. What can I say? Gogmamon is just the GOAT. He's an SR for a reason. Extremely powerful. Love everything that he does. And we'll talk about more how he especially plays a big role in this deck's game plan moving forward in a bit. Now let's get into the fun stuff here. So, level 6s, we have 3 copies of Craniamon. And so Craniamon is probably one of the most powerful things Black has in the BT6 meta because deletion is flying left, right, sideways, up, down, front, back. Craniamon is the one, right? He's the one that's going to protect himself, protect a lot of your cards, even protect your security from attacks, right? Craniamon is just super powerful. Now, I only run 3 instead of a full set because that 4 cost is not always beneficial. And the other level 6 that I have is probably something that I may want to see a little bit more often than Craniamon. Typically, I would only want to see Craniamon just like once in a match. So we're going to put Craniamon aside, and we're going to talk about our next level 6 here. 4 copies of Bryway Ludramon. And so, level 6, Inheritable, gives blocker. And we got 4 copies, which means this deck is going up to its level 7s. Other than that, 12,000 DP is decent. That 10 cost to play, I've seen a couple times where I just like hard play him and hope that he doesn't get removed somehow. But really it's just for that inheritable that we play him. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So we'll go ahead and move forward here. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into our level 7s. We have 3 copies of Zwart Defeat. Now, Zwart Defeat, he's pretty well known in the BT5 meta. He comes out security, adding to a lot of the stuff we've already got going on with our security effects. He has that on deletion, which is going to be crucial. I'm going to talk about that. Delete one of your opponent's Digimon. And then when Digivolving, another crucial effect, deleting a Tamer. So Zwart Defeat even has more value, I believe, in this set than he did in the last set. So yeah, Zwart Defeat's really cool. And speaking of increased value, let's talk about our next level 7, 2 copies of Omnimon Alter S. And I'm going to talk about that value in a moment, but just to go over what he does, he can make himself unblockable when attacking by bouncing the level 6 that's under him to hand. And on Digivolve, you can de-Digivolve 1 your opponent's entire board and then delete everything that's 5,000 DP and less, which is also decently crucial in this meta, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But yeah, Alter S is clutch. Then we have the most powerful card in this deck. My favorite card. The reason why I was going crazy in the shower. 2 copies of Omnimon X Antibody. So, listen. When X Antibody comes out, I'll just say this. If your opponent cannot remove X Antibody, they lose. They lose. Unless they already have advantage, they just lose. He stops attacks. You can stop. If you have a full stack under him, he's stopping 3 attacks, and he's deleting on every one of his own attacks. And he's insanely powerful too. It's the 15,000 DP. If you have some other buffs going on in your deck, then, sky's the limit with this guy. So, yeah, X Antibody is just extremely powerful, and he's one of the main cards that's going to really defy this meta. So, yeah, 2 copies of the Omnimon X Antibody. All right, so let's talk about tech cards. Every tech card that I have in this deck is just a one of, right? I think Ray and I will talk a little bit about the philosophy of it, maybe a little bit on in the deck profile. But yeah, just a one of each of these cards, right? And each of these cards brings something to the table, some sort of value that I really enjoy and I think is beneficial overall to the deck. So we'll start off with the first one. Ultimate Flare, funny enough, is better in this meta than it was in the last meta. So much more relevant. So de-Digivolve 3 to one of your opponent's Digimon, delete everything that's a play cost of 3 or less. Ultimate Flare comes up a lot in this meta. I'm going to put him to the side. A single copy of Black Memory Boost. So look at the top 4 cards of your deck on play, add a Black Digimon to hand, and then delay, gain 2 memory. So obviously, because we have a lot of white cards, white level 7s here, this isn't going to be able to add it to hand, but every once in a while, you do want to do a little bit of a search to get a piece that you really need. So just the 1 copy of the Black Memory Boost, a single copy of Izzy Izumi. And so Izzy Izumi, it's nice to have a memory fixer. I do have Izzy and Joe in this deck. I'll talk about Izzy and Joe in a second. But just being able to set your memory to 3 in a way that your opponent cannot play around, like you're always going to have that 3, I find very beneficial. The reveal of the top 3 to look, to rearrange, it's okay. I'm not super thrilled about it, but it comes up sometimes and it's nice. So put Izzy to the side. Then we have Izzy and Joe, like I said before. Izzy and Joe, now this memory fixer gives you an additional 2 memory at the beginning of your turn if your opponent has 2 or more Digimon in play, which does come up, especially with all the blockers that we're going to have. Your opponent a lot of times is going to have no choice but to go wide, and then once they do, you start gaining memory from this guy. Also, the extra draw on the deletion of one of your Black Digimon is pretty useful too. So Izzy and Joe is pretty nice. We have the single copy of Takumi Aiba. And so Takumi Aiba is another one of those options for us to be able to draw to continue to dig into our deck. The draw power on this guy is just insane. I almost milled myself Uh, I almost drew my deck by using Takumi alone. And the lose one memory for level 3 Digimon who are attacking is also pretty relevant in this meta as well. So yeah, Takumi Aiba is really awesome. And then lastly, no black deck of mine is complete without Final Zubagon Punch. At least one. And it, to be honest, it pains me to bring it down to 1. It started off as 3, brought it down to 2, and then finally I was like, you know what? To really make this deck work, I need to have just 1 and make some space for the other cards that I need. So we just have the 1 copy of Final Zubagon Punch, which works with all of our Omnis. It works with Craniumon always if you Digivolve all the way up because of your egg. And Brightway Luchamon, it will work if you have him over Gogmamon. So not 100% consistent, but you're going to be able to use it very often in a lot of your matches. So Final Zubagon Punch, just a quick review, gives plus 3,000 DP. If that Digimon then hits 16,000 DP or higher, gets blocker, reboot, security attack plus 1, all to the end of your opponent's next turn. So I love this card. I'm going to make sure I keep using it in future metas moving forward. Okay, so this deck is mainly about defying the meta, taking the biggest meta decks and standing up against them, right? And the card that mainly helps us, one of the main cards that helps us do that, is Craniumon. And the reason why I say Craniumon is because there are many powerful decks out there that have deletion abilities. So think about Bond of Bravery or Bond of Courage, whichever you call it. You have the option cards it has access to, as well as Bond of Bravery himself, that on attacking deletes something 13,000 DP. You have Titamon. Titamon with the Skull Greymon combo, giving retaliation to virtually any of its Digimon. And, they could also tech in Trump Sword, or, a lot of just like removal cards just get stopped because Craniumon is in play. You also have Musketeers, speaking of option cards. Just like all those deletion option cards completely stopped with Craniumon. And funny enough, the mirror match against Royal Knights, right? If you're going up against Black, those things also become stopped as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how this deck stops those things. So we'll talk about Bravery for both of the bonds, as a matter of fact. So we're going up against, let's say, Bond of Courage, right? The main thing you want to do clearly is get Craniumon out. Once Craniumon's out, you're pretty much smooth sailing from there. You practically have the game. Now, addition to that, right? Let's say they're playing a little bit risky and they want to, I don't know, for some reason your Craniumon's suspended, they want to attack it, whatever the case. That's why we run things like Gigadramon here and Toy Agumon. So when you have Craniumon over Gigadramon and over Toy Agumon, he goes from being a 12,000 DP blocker to 15,000 on your opponent's turn. That means Bond of Bravery is almost completely shut down unless they have something specific to DP boost it. Another thing to consider too is that when they go into Bond of Bravery, they have to burn 2 security. So if they can't make that turn count, which a lot of the times they can't, then they just completely wasted 2 security and their turn and a Bond of Bravery in hand. So Craniumon is just completely insane for that. Now, for similar reasons, he also stands up to Bond of Friendship, right? You do have to make sure that you're playing around Rattlestar, right? So you want to have no more than 2 Digimon in play. You could work on a third one in the raising area. But once you have him out, 15,000 DP, that's pretty much it. Bond of Friendship cannot swing into your security. Builds that use Ancient Garurumon are not swinging into your security because he's just too high to get over. Now, mind you, if you combine that with a Brightway Ludramon, right, with the Zwart Defeats, 16,000 DP blocker. Even more so if you have Alteress. What's that? 16, 17, 18,000 DP blocker. They cannot get over. And mind you, with Kakaitis Breath, they could remove it, but now they're giving you a bunch of memory so that you could just build right back up. And so it's a trade-off, but these are some of the ways that you're stopping the Bond decks. Now, Tidamon's pretty straightforward. Just Craniumon. That's pretty much it. You have Craniumon, go wide, and you have things like Alteress, that once your opponent falls for the trap and starts going wide, you go for an Alteress play, and you just clear the board, set them way back. Zwart Defeat, I wouldn't really say it applies too much in that matchup, but also helps. And in any situation, if you have Craniumon out against any of these deletion heavy decks, if you have Craniumon out next to X Antibody with blocker, they might as well just scoop. They might as well just scoop right there. You have Brightway Lutramon with the Omnimon over and Craniomon's on the side supporting. Any of these deletion decks might as well just scoop right there. That includes Musketeers as well. Musketeers, Titamon, it's a very identical situation. Now, the mirror match, right? Because one thing that you might be thinking was like, okay, the Royal Knights deck, they have access to Ultimate Flare, and Craniumon is not immune to that. And you are absolutely right. Craniumon is not immune to that. Craniumon could be digivolved all the way back down to a level 3, and then you're kind of back to square one, and then Iron Fisted Onslaught becomes live, Genkomon becomes live, all of that stuff. However, if you have Gogmamon, and before going into Craniumon, you Digiburst 3, and then go into Craniumon, that Ultimate Flare doesn't look worth it at all. In fact, you might welcome an Ultimate Flare so that they could give you all that memory, and then you could return the favor by building right back up, or doing another cool play of your own. Right? Iron Fisted Onslaught becomes dead. Genkomon becomes dead. And Ultimate Flare can be used, but is it really worth it to use an Ultimate Flare on a Craniumon that's over Gogmamon? Not really. And then from there, you just build up your Digimon on the side, you build up your Omnimons, you give them blockers, so on, and it just becomes harder for your opponent to get past this immense wall that you're making. Alright, so taking care of the Bond decks isn't really too much of a problem. Taking care of decks that primarily rely on deletion abilities isn't really an issue. But then we have Jesmon, right? So Jesmon can swing multiple times, an enormous amount of DP, and can swing at your unsuspended Digimon. So that leaves us with the conundrum, well, what do? We could bring our blockers pretty high, right? We could theoretically put in Alteress over Gigadramon and Toy Agumon and give him blocker with the Brightway Ludramon, right? We could do all of that in theory, but at best, he's only getting up to 16, 17, 18,000 DP, which is pretty high, but Jesmon can get higher. And so what do we do about this? Well, what we do is we don't necessarily focus on Alteress. Rather, instead, we would prefer to have Zwart out at all costs. We want to get out Zwart. We want to give him blocker with Brightway Ludramon. Because then if your opponent's Jesmon dares to swing, you block with that Zwart and their Jesmon is gone. And they only have 3 left in the deck, one of which might be in their security, and it puts them in a really tough spot. If it's one of those Jesmon decks that uses another level 6, we're not typically scared of those because they don't have as much value as Jesmon does in that deck. So we have Zwart out, and while Zwart is good for stalling, slowing down your opponent, giving us an opportunity to dig and come up with a comeback, that's not what we mainly rely on. At the end, we also have our trump card, X Antibody, which is especially powerful in a lot of Jesmon decks who are not running hard removal like Gaia Force or Atomic Blaster, right? So you have X Antibody that just comes in. Ideally, right, he would have a full stack with a level 4 and 2 as well, being able to stop 3 attacks total. For every 2 that you trash under him, you can stop an attack, which means even with the unsuspending power of Jesmon and the power of Omnimon from BT5 on top of that, he can still stop it and punish it on the following turn. And so, yeah, X Antibody is immensely powerful in this deck. You also have things like, one thing to mention too, right? And this comes up sometimes. Let's say you do have Zwart or Alteress with blocker, and you need to stall a little bit more to get your X Antibody out to slow down your opponent. Gogmamon's ability to boost DP is insanely powerful and valuable in these matchups. Just being able to Digiburst cards under him and boost them to over 20,000 DP, that Jesmon can't get over, at least not easily, not without calling out multiple Sistermon CLs. And so being able to build up a Gogmamon, boost up the DP, last a couple more turns is insanely valuable. Jesmon is a tricky matchup, but this deck is more than capable of defeating it if you have the right pieces. Zwart defeating it, that is. Badumts. And yeah, those are some of the main points there. You know, Altarus has other applications in clearing a whole board of Sistermons. You have Ultimate Flare, which is really good for clearing the Sistermon belongs, a Jesmon, as well as being a good card against the bomb decks, right? Because they typically go wide with their rookies. Speaking of rookies, Takumi comes in very handy in making the Sistermons and any other rookies a cost 1, like a lose 1 memory in order to attack. Also very good for the bond decks as well. So yeah, pretty much everything in these decks is tailored towards stopping those meta decks that really try to make your day a nightmare, right? Swinging over your Digimon, removing Digimon, just making everything very challenging for you, very difficult. Now, here's something I'll say. While this deck is immensely powerful, right, it has a lot of potential. DP could go sky high, could protect a lot of your Digimon, and you have a lot of forms of removal, a lot of aggression as well that you have in this deck. It's not perfect, and there are some tricky matchups. One tricky matchup is just any kind of yellow deck, because this deck is not immune to DP reduction. And so as high as you can get your blockers, they could knock your blockers down a peg and make it so that they're not as valuable as a blocker. And a lot of the times you're not going to really want to block with them unless it's Word Defeat. So Word Defeat's really good for just like sacking him. I know you got to work hard to get up to him, but a lot of the times you got to pick your battles and intentionally sacrifice him to slow your opponent down. But yeah, yellow is pretty tricky. And the hardest matchup, two matchups I think that this deck really struggles with, is blue, like Hex blue specifically with Hex Blaumon. If they focus more on a Zulongmon, then it's whatever. But Hex Blaumon really puts this deck in a tough spot. And Security Control, mainly because all the toys that Security has in not just black and red, but yellow, right? You have the Reinforced Memory Boost, and you have Wyvern's Breath. You have a lot of stuff that could really hurt you and slow you down. And the thing is, this deck isn't really that fast in removing security either. You only have the one final Zubagon Punch, and there's no Son of Rizamon in this deck, so that means, for the most part, you're chipping. So if a security control deck starts to go off in the recovery and yellow removal and things like that, it's a nightmare for this deck. But against the meta decks, against the decks that you're going to see the most, Bond of Bravery, Bond of Friendship, Jesmon, Lilith Loop, even a lot of purple decks, Musketeers, those decks that you're going to see the most often, this deck thrives. It does so well, and I'm really proud of this deck. It's not definitive. There, some couple tech cards you can switch out, changes you can make in the level 4s. Heck, you could even make some changes in the level 5s as well. But this is what I put together, and I think it's immensely great. Very happy with it. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about this deck here. Ray, do you have any closing remarks? Thanks for your input, Ray. Well, make sure you like, comment, subscribe for more deck profiles. We got a lot more coming. We have a lot more content coming. We got some talks about a Discord in our comment section. We'll see about that. Maybe if we get that subscriber count up, we could do a little bit of a Discord. But for now, we're just going to focus on making videos. But with all that being said, hope you guys enjoyed. And remember, stay stacking.